conference, and I would like to introduce our first speaker of this final session. It's Klaus Lemke-Paetznick. As you will know from the church service we attended on Sunday morning and yesterday evening's prayer in front of our dinner, before our dinner, he's a pastor. He studied theology in Hamburg, Göttingen and Kiel. Then he was a pastor in the German-Danish borderland for a few years, and then was pastor in the German Armed Forces, and as pastor he accompanied the German Navy in the Mediterranean. He was shot at by pirates. At a later stage he also met Nelson Mandela in his life, and now he's back as a pastor in the German Navy based at Wilhelmshaven, and he's now going to talk to Theodor Olshausen, which we've heard before. He's talking to Theodor Olshausen, History of the Mormons. Klaus, thank you very much.
Dear friends of 48, please imagine the Church of the Latter-day Saints was only 25 years old when its early history was published in German language in 1856. The author of this publication was a native of Schleswig-Holstein, Theodor Olshausen. Born in 1802 in Glückstadt, Holstein, he grew up in the small town Eutin, where his father served as a senior pastor. Subsequently, Theodor Olshausen spent most of his youth abroad. After attending Kiel University, he moved to the University of Jena in 1821. Here he came into contact with members of the Burschenschaft, the German student fraternities, and soon became a member himself. The Burschenschaft movement first appeared in public German life shortly after the end of the Wars of Liberation against Napoleon during the Wartburg festival. Here's the Wartburg, name giver for this pretty college. In 1870, the political fragmentation of Germany abided in the minds of the people for many years. At the end of the long war against the French Empire, they envisioned Germany attaining national unity by its own power. Not less than 40 of the 468 students who joined the Wartburg festival were from Schleswig and Holstein. The opening address was delivered by Heinrich Arminius Riemann, who came from Eutin. The strategic goal of the fraternity students was to anticipate political German unity within an organization that had a strong collaborative presence at all German universities. Two of his brothers had joined the Wartburg festival. The 15-year-old Theodor Olshausen had to stay at home. But now in 1821, he joined the German student fraternity in Jena. In the political field, currently subject of the Grand Duke of Oldenburg, Olshausen, who was by birth and former subject of the Danish king as Duke of Schleswig and Holstein, was admitted into the circle of the Jünglingsbund, a secret alliance of young men who were prepared to fight for German unity with weapons. Like many of his comrades from Schleswig and Holstein, Olshausen preferred a withdrawal of the duchies Schleswig and Holstein from the Danish state. This brought him political persecution from the Danish university administration. So he was forced to flee via Hamburg and Amsterdam to Paris. During his stay of several years in France, he lived temporarily in Basel, Switzerland. Only a pardon by King Frederick VI of Denmark in 1828 allowed him to return to his homeland. In Kiel, Olshausen got his law degree and lived there since 1830 as a publicist and editor of his own newspaper called Kieler Korrespondenzblatt. This newspaper became the sustainable communication agency during the Schleswig-Holstein pre-March era. The son of a pastor, Olshausen was intimately acquainted with the contemporary involvement of the state church in the institutional structures of the absolutistic state. Bound by their oath to the Danish king as ruler of Schleswig and Holstein, pastors in the duchies worked as public servants and had to both read governmental political decrees from their pulpit as well as pray for the king and his family during church services every Sunday. Olshausen had to experience how the dissidents' secret meetings in the 1830s were reported to the government by clergymen. In this context, Olshausen was engaged for freedom of religion and belief early on. One of his demands concerned the possibility of leaving the church without a loss of any civil rights. In conjunction with these beliefs, he also campaigned for an extension of all civil rights for Jews. During the pre-March era, Olshausen praised the American religious freedom in his journal, stating that the government doesn't bother about the church. Olshausen repeatedly defied the state by denouncing ecclesiastical inequalities in his newspaper. Under the conditions of censorship, Olshausen used his criticism of the church for a publishable critique of the absolutistic state, which provided civil liberty and justice by its traditional social structures. The events of 1848, which were tied to the February Revolution in Paris, led the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein to an upheaval against Denmark that came to an end only after a 3-year-long war resulting in the duchy's defeat. Olshausen had initially taken ministerial rank in this uprising as an unconditional Democrat. He belonged to the extreme left of the acting politicians in the duchies with his advocacy of the idea of an inalienable sovereignty of the people. But he surrendered his governmental office already in August 1848 because of his protest against the armistice of Malmö, which had been forced by St. Paul's Church in Frankfurt. His participation in the provisional government and his long-standing political opposition against the constitution of the Danish state, which had changed from an absolutistic one to a constitutional monarchy in March 1848, caused Olshausen to flee from governmental arrest. So now he was looking for a new home in the United States. Via New York, Theodor Olshausen passed first St. Louis, Missouri. He became immediately active in journalism, engaged in the newspaper business, and in a relatively short time wrote a number of books on the social and geographical conditions within those states which he was acquainted with. Once he himself had ventured from the East Coast to the western frontier of the United States of his days, he learned of the fate of the Mormons. This religious community, founded in Manchester, New York in 1831, was subject to severe persecution that threatened its survival. At the same time that the church had successful mission in England and Scandinavia, the Mormons walked their life of suffering from the state of New York to Ohio, then from Ohio to Missouri, from there to Illinois, and finally to that territory occupied by Indians, which the Mormons symbolically termed desert. That is, it means honey. The Utah territory was finally admitted into the Union as the 45th state in 1896, but not before the Mormons ended their custom of polygamy, which they had practiced in the late 1830s. What caused the exiled Schleswig-Holstein native and political 48er Theodor Olshausen to publish a history of the Mormons? In 1854, he published his volume, The State of Missouri, Geographically and Statistical in Q. There he noted the Mormons still lacked respect. He said, a community of Mormons or Latter-day Saints can usually be found among the smaller religious communities in St. Louis. From time to time, the majority of its members moves to Utah, and the worship gatherings are then closed for a while, but it does not last long until another new community comes together. Olshausen himself was almost indifferent in religious terms, intended to drift away from the state church to rather deistic positions. He then wrote in his own publication with passionate concern about the progress of a church community with contrasting structures of a theodemocracy and a legal absolutism. He had clearly recognized and identified these topics of the Mormon belief. But the sufficient reason of his authorial accusation was, as he said, the illegal and cruel persecution to which the Mormons have been exposed in the United States. Unlike his pre-March vision taken from the perspective of a Schleswig-Holstein journalist, Olshausen had now learned to recognize religious freedom as it was actually practiced in the United States as he notes, freedom proclaimed with pomp, which is often violated by the people, while the governments don't have the will or the power to avoid it. Even against the background of his personal detachment and skepticism towards any ecclesiasticism, Olshausen's opinion on the handling of the American non-Mormon public with the Mormons is very clear. He wrote, the period of persecution shows the injustice, meanness, and rawness on the part of a nation who praises itself as being the freest and best educated in the land, wins more favor for the prophet and his followers. Beyond their religious beliefs, Olshausen agrees with the Mormons in their rejection of slavery. Half a decade before the outbreak of the Civil War, the exiled journalists praised the animosity of the Mormons against the sinful slave owner. Olshausen denounced the rotten spot of the American political life, which maybe was the main lever in the whole agitation against the Mormons in Missouri, as well as perhaps later in Illinois. When Olshausen came to the account of Prophet Joseph Smith's presidential candidacy in 1844, he highlighted the general abolition of slavery, which was incorporated in the Constitution of the Mormons after the arrival in desolate Utah as Smith's own trendsetting item on the agenda. In addition to the social minority of black slaves, the Mormons also considered the Indians as indigenous people. Olshausen described the opinion of the prophet Joseph Smith, who declared them as descendants of the lost tribes of Israel, and thus descendants of that portion God's people scattered across the Atlantic to America. The bequeathed writing of these people, according to Mormon belief, were discovered by the prophet Joseph Smith during September 1827 by revelation. From the outset, however, the Indian tribes felt the missionary interest of the Mormons, but as Olshausen observed, only a few individual Indians converted to the Mormon faith. The Mormon approach to adoption and integration of social minorities remained significant in its contemporary context. With equal clarity, Olshausen also studied the Latter-day Saints' doctrine of election and the effects of this doctrine as a basis for confrontation with the Republicans countrywide. Because the Mormons removed themselves from the large number of Christian sects and considered them heathens. This behavior, according to Olshausen, indicated an effort by the Mormons to cut themselves off in an old Jewish way against all other people. The Mormons' retreat to the western border of civilization was historically necessary, but in a cybernetic perspective, it was also wisely chosen, because the Mormons used the retreat into the wilderness so that, as he notes, they would for a time have dominion alongside some Indian tribes. Although they appreciated the sovereignty of the federal government of the United States, the external application of the U.S. government, noted Olshausen, correlated with the constants of the Mormonism, as though the author recognized the hierarchical principle of prophethood and thereby the character of variability, the continued relation. As a consequence of the theodemocracy, which is well elected as accepted by the Mormons, Olshausen recognized a significant encroachment of the clerical authorities on the public conditions. Joseph Smith should have been seen as the founder and prophet of the Mormons community, and thus Olshausen wanted to consider him as the benefactor of a new religion which is significantly different from all other Christian sects, as constitution and ruler of an independent and unique domination. With all this, Joseph Smith should neither, as Olshausen writes, be considered much worse or much better as the host of men from the past or present who have as enthusiasts and half as misleading by consciousness assumed to have a privileged position to the deity. It is ascertainable in the Book of Mormon that here the style of writing is often very different. Olshausen considers it is so often very different, so much that for this reason there is no doubt that various authors have worked on the translation. Also, the scriptures of the Mormons would not be sufficient to outline an entire and correct description of the Mormon belief and perceptions. For all their doctrines and institutions are subjects of a continued fast changing. And even sentences, Olshausen says, which occur in their older religious scriptures as basic tenets have been later eliminated in part-by-part revelations, partly by Murdoch crime. Exactly this separated the Mormons from the Protestants. The revelation of Protestants is finalized. The Mormon prophet, so writes Olshausen, asks himself daily for new revelations from heaven. With such a sober and focusing distinction, Olshausen doesn't make a judgment based on the religious truth. He leaves the truth to those finding it on the field of the Mormonism or elsewhere. He even becomes a cautious defender of the Mormons, attaining in touch apologetics when he holds censorously a lot of reports about Mormonism have been spread by apostates. With all this means is clear. For Olshausen, it is not a matter of critique of dogmatic systems. This he rather refers to the religious freedom which ought to be asserted in the United States. Olshausen's interest lies in an accusation of the lack of justice inside America's contemporary society. So Olshausen's history of the Mormons is like an indictment. The shortage of justice, as the author recognizes, led to an avenue exodus of the Mormons, and his decision about the lynching of the prophet Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram, who had been imprisoned in the Illinois State Penitentiary in Carthage, was quite severe. Olshausen knows the murders ended the prophet's days and were celebrated by his followers as a martyr's death, giving his sect probably far more inner power and strength than his longer life could have done. Olshausen also meted out severe judgments of those people who were guilty as persecutors of the Mormons. When considering the massacre of House Mills, Missouri, in which 20 unarmed Mormons, as well as a cruelly killed young child, were murdered, he wrote, "Could there be any cannibals able to carry out more bestiality and inhumanity than these Missourians?" Olshausen considered the defenselessness of the Mormons who had been forced into their exodus as to be rooted in the US Constitution. He writes, if individual citizens or residents of the state or communities and other corporations are going to get a raw deal, ever so unlawful, cruel, and outrageous, the federal government, as laid down in the Constitution, does not have to intervene. The federal government only protects the existing state authority, but does not care whether this state authority fulfills the duty against the citizens or not, as long as this state authority is able to retain the outwardly form of the republic. What a criticism. Thus Olshausen brands the too short arm of the contemporary executive authority, when those liberties given by the legislative branch cannot be protected against collective attacks. Accordingly, the German 48er could comprehend the setup of a Mormon state between the spring of 1839 and February 1846, which pursued the ambition to occupy complete legislative power under the Constitution and to build up an almost independent system of government. This happened in the location formerly known as Independence, Illinois, which the Mormons renamed Nauvoo, a town whose population surpassed the number of inhabitants in Chicago during those few years. Yet precisely At this point, Olshausen recognized under the sign of the Mormon theodemocracy the persistent problem of the imbalance between theocracy and democracy. For in the Mormon state, as he writes, the spiritual and the secular affairs are so closely affiliated with each other that they must not be separated. In the ideal state, there does not exist any separate secular and religious government. This idea should not be completely realized until that time in future, when their community will be accepted as its own independent state. Olshausen considered the idea of the sovereignty of the people in the Mormon community as fallen by the wayside. He notes the hierarchical principle, meaning the monarchy of the prophet, partly hidden under aristocratic and partly under democratic forms, has almost completely devoured the popular government. Every word of God which the prophet professes to have received suspends the whole constitutionalism. Even the contemporary practice of polygamy, Olshausen classified as an aristocratic use and as inside an apprentice democracy as non-existent. Nevertheless, Olshausen highlighted the liberties of the Mormon woman in comparison to Oriental polygamy. But this short side glance on the Islamic conditions indicates his empathy for religious determined social systems, which even in the context of democratic structures must remain foreign to the Western spirit. Those religious determined social systems are basically oriented on the will of the deity, who almost must be explained by revealers in order to retain followers. We see today a remarkable currentness at this juncture when we compare this to the conditions in Egypt as the sequel of the Arab Spring. Here, a civil, warlike conflict proceeded around a democratically elected ex-government who threatened to limit civil rights by her religious foundation. Theodor Olshausen is not the only German 48er who dedicates a treatise to the Mormons and their fate during the 1850s. Even the Saxon 48er Moritz Busch published a brochure titled The Mormons, 1855 in Leipzig. Primarily, he wanted in his book, which is steeped by the spirit of enlightenment, with the attitude of a revolutionary, to show that, as he said, the light of education does not light nearly as far in our time as is commonly assumed, and that the United States, in particular, as well as England, have good reason to use more sparingly the attribute of an enlightened nation than they would normally award themselves. The Mormons seen him as an imposing and awful community whom he would like to compare with the Puritans of New England. Those would have had a theodemocratic governance which would have borne glorious fruits, wherefrom they later perished. Busch's achievements conclude succinctly with the wish that the Mormons might have the same destiny. Thus, Moritz Busch admittedly reveals the attitude of a detractor of the Mormons' faith, though he estimated himself as being religionless enlightened. But he falls far behind the foresight of Theodor Olshausen, who attains a warm humanity connected with differentiated, cooperative critique. While Moritz Busch, after 1870, was a true proponent of Otto von Bismarck and of his German Empire, Theodor Olshausen remained until his death in 1869 true to his legacy of the French Revolution, true to those values of 1848 which are named justice and liberty. A few years before his death, Olshausen left us in his political testament his democratic legacy. The self-government of the people doesn't suffer any princely sway at the head. This assessment applies to all religious and political structures opposing itself against any kind of neo-feudalism. Thank you.
Klaus, thank you very much for this excellent, well-presented paper. So choose the opportunity to ask any questions to the expert. Who wants to start? Yes, please.
Actually, I'm going to take off the question you just asked. I think a lot of people have the perception that the Mormons were totally intolerant, and I think that maybe you can clarify or sort of explore this, the difference in approach between Brigham Young and Joseph Smith.
Okay, Brigham Young was the follower, following prophet, and he was the man who brought the Mormons to Utah. As I told you, the first prophet has been killed still in Illinois. I guess the practical problems and the solution of ecumenical problems have been the work of Brigham Young. He was a very strong one, and he had the possibility to rule as a Mormon prophet on a, let me say, fundament which had been laid already before. During the Joseph Smith era, everything was going to be formed. Brigham Young had forms. He had personally enemies, could put them at the side, and forced the Mormons to get an own state behind the frontier, and then calmly and quietly to build up an own state. The religious revelations he got as well as the first prophet, but not yet so much.
But I mean, with respect in particular to the view of native tribes or blacks, I think that the two had very different views.
Okay, okay. Now I understand the problem of Brigham Young, especially not so much against the Indian tribes, but more than against the black people, is very great. Joseph Smith accepted everyone. And Brigham Young returned to a position where he said a religious higher rank in our Mormonism is not able to be climbable for a black.
To use the story of Ham and Shem, the Canaanites.
Explain.
Does he use the Canaanite argument so that the descendants of Canaan would be condemned to slavery forever? Does he use that argument?
No. But this I don't know because it's not in his.
It's not. It's actually.
Yes, it's historical. And on the base of our book, Brigham Young is accepted. It's already noticed that he is. Yes, he is quite particularly against black people because they have not the possibility to get a prophet or something else in the following future. But that is the end of where Olshausen stops. Okay?
Thank you.
Any further questions to Klaus on Olshausen and the Mormons? Daniel.
I'm surprised that Olshausen has a pretty positive view of the Mormons, at least initially. Most 48ers really disliked the Mormons and really were very aggressively against it, especially against polygamy. And so when we had the argument that the 48ers were all tolerant people and all for democracy and human rights, that there were certain exceptions to that rule, and the Mormons certainly were a big exception for most 48ers. So, but was apparently pretty accommodating. Did it change over time, or is it the only publication that is survived? Yeah.
Yes, it's the only one from him. I guess, as I tried to explain, he doesn't love the Mormons as religious people. He loved, he wanted to describe the terrible exodus of poor people, which under a government which was held as a government of enlightenment and of justice and peace, to an exodus. There's so many thousand people have been killed and struggled. And so he took a social group inside together by a common religious belief as an example for terrible relations in the contemporary United States.
One more question, maybe?
And, excuse me, and as you mentioned, Daniel, he's the only one who came, or one of a few people of the 48ers who came to a positive relation to the Mormons. I guess that is caused in the fact that Theodor Olshausen is one of the best fortunate.
So, share that view on Theodor Olshausen. Maybe we can take one more question now. You will also get the chance to ask any of the three speakers once we finish with the last one. So, if I can't see any question now, then we move on with our next speaker. Once again, a big applause. Our next speaker will be Joachim Bodenstaff. And Joachim Bodenstaff is a graduate of the University of Kiel. He studied there political sciences and got a master's degree. After studying political science, he went into politics for several years. He was assistant to one of the parties in the Schleswig-Holstein parliament and was there responsible for cultural and educational affairs. About a year ago, he moved to Berlin and is now their assistant to one member of the German parliament from Schleswig-Holstein. He's changed a bit the subject. He's now responsible for transport and traffic affairs in the German parliament. So please welcome Joachim Bodenstaff, and he's going to tell us, as we've heard before already, about Olshausen once again, the Olshausenstele. He is one of the guys, together with Yogi Reppmann, who started to bring back the memory of the 48ers in Kiel, and that is what he's going to tell us now. Joachim, your turn.
Thanks, that's right. My topic is modern 48er culture of memory. And I'm trying to give answers to three questions. At first, who were the Olshausen brothers? Second, why is a stele on the campus of Kiel University dedicated to them? And at last, what is this stele's message for today's university students? So, who were the Olshausen brothers? About Theodor Olshausen, we just heard a bit, I repeat. But let me start with the project of the stele in Kiel. Every student and alumnus knows the street Olshausenstraße from the daily trip to the Christian Albrecht University in Kiel, the capital city of the German state Schleswig-Holstein. This street was named in memory of the brothers Justus and Theodor Olshausen. To keep their memory alive, a small monument was erected and dedicated to them on June 5th in 2009. And Dr. Joachim Yogi Reppmann, the very same man to whom we owe thanks for today's conference, led the initiative to erect this monument. In the course of my paper, I'd like to unfold the meaning and the background, both of the memorial and the Olshausen brothers, as well as the reasons why their convictions and their actions can serve as an example for today's students to help build a positive political future of their own country. Above all, there's a question, apart from the important, constant reminder of the Nazi catastrophe in German history, why do we need a positive memory of the first fragile blossoms of German democratic history in the 19th century? So, Theodor Olshausen, He was born on June 19th in 1802 in Glückstadt on the river Elbe. He died on March 21st, 1869 in Hamburg. He was a member of the provisional Schleswig-Holstein government in Kiel and a staunch Republican politician and newspaper editor. Having been a student of law in Kiel and Jena, he was one of the spokesmen of the 1848 March Revolution in Schleswig-Holstein, which he had helped to organize as the managing editor of the newspaper Kieler Korrespondenzblatt, as we just heard. The political aim of this revolutionary movement was Schleswig-Holstein's secession from Danish rule. As a former member of the provisional Schleswig-Holstein government, he faced the prospect of being imprisoned by the Royal Danish authorities. Therefore, he took refuge in the United States of America in the year 1851. In America, he became managing editor and joint owner of the German newspapers Der Telegraph in Davenport, Iowa, and Westliche Post in St. Louis, Missouri. The newspaper, where a certain Joseph Pulitzer started his career. There, he continued fighting for his Republican concepts and published articles for the abolition of slavery. His brother Justus Olshausen, his older brother, was born on May 9 in 1800 in Hohenfelde in Schleswig-Holstein and died on December 28 in 1882 in Berlin. In 1817, as we just heard, he had taken part in the Wartburg Fest, and in 1848 he was the first vice president of the Schleswig-Holstein Constitutional Parliament in Kiel. Also a Republican, he was as a linguist for Oriental languages and served as a Vortragender Rat, that's a reporting counselor, of the Prussian Ministry of Education in Berlin. Like his younger brother, he actively supported the movement for independence within the dukedoms of Schleswig and Holstein, which were Danish at the time. In the year of the 1848 revolution in Schleswig-Holstein, he became curator of the University of Kiel and, at times, very influential within the political leadership of the Schleswig-Holstein Parliament. After the failure of the Schleswig-Holstein uprising, he was sacked by the Danish government in 1852. On recommendation of his friend Alexander von Humboldt, this successful linguist, who had proved a very able organizer during his time as president of Kiel University, was appointed chief librarian and professor in Königsberg, which was in East Prussia, today Russia. From 1858 to 1874, he was a reporting counselor in the Prussian Ministry of Education, and from 1860 he was a member of the Prussian Royal Academy. So, question number 2. Why is there a stele dedicated to them on Kiel University campus? You can see on this picture Yogi, Reppmann and me with living descendants of Justus Olshausen. Well, the official inauguration with the unveiling of the memorial was preceded by a festive ceremony which was attended by high-ranking personalities. Yogi Reppmann had been very successful at inviting illustrious guests, among them representatives of the city of Kiel and the president of Kiel University, apart from papers about the latest research on the revolution of 1848 in Schleswig-Holstein. There were also living descendants of Justus Olshausen in attendance. One of them, a retired professor, you can see him in the middle, he's a professor of law who still carries the Olshausen name. He gave a talk in which he combined the history of his family with the happenings of the year 1848. The president of Kiel City, Kathy Kietzer, aptly praised the merits of the young Republicans around the Olshausen brothers within both the political and the historical context. Here you can see her in the middle. From the curriculum vitae, Theodor Olshausen, President Kathy Kietzer said in a speech at the ceremony at June 5th, 2009, Theodor Olshausen, born on June 19th, 1802, became a student of law in 1820 and studied in Kiel as well as in Jena. Here, he was the only student from Kiel who joined the Jünglingsbund, the association of young men, we were just told what it was, who stood for changes in contemporary society, which meant more liberty and democracy. The Prussian Ministry of the Interior even put him on a wanted ad because of his political activities. He fled to Paris in France, where he worked as a private teacher under a false name. Theodor Olshausen was an imperturbable, courageous and straightforward person who worked for free thinking. Many inhabitants of Kiel don't know which malicious masterminds of our own democracy can be found in our city. We must be more aware of the roots of our democracy. Especially the young people of our country should know more about positive aspects of our past. By this, a more relaxed, but at the same time not uncritical, approach to another aspect of our past can be made possible. Simultaneously, this could be an important step to counteract the general lack of interest in politics. Today we can learn, without steadfastness and activity there can be no democracy. So far, Gerd Kietzer. It is of considerable interest here that President Kietzer comes from a Danish family background. And even today, it is not easy for many citizens of Danish descendants in Schleswig-Holstein to view the activities of the 1848 protagonists with respect to their contemporary relevance, because these 48ers wanted nothing short of a complete secession from the Danish comprehensive state. The uprising of 1848, as it is called in Schleswig-Holstein and by German historiography, is in Denmark still labeled as a rebellion. During the war that followed the events of 1848, the Danish monarchy lost about 1/3 of its territory and a major part of its population to the winners, which were Prussia and Austria, in 1864. Among their territories was Denmark's second biggest town, Altona, which is now a part of Hamburg. This loss has always been remembered by what can be called the collective consciousness of Denmark. President Kietz's analysis, which she presented neutrally and soberly, as well as her stress on the republicanism and the democratic activities of the Olshausen brothers, is, in my opinion, the correct approach. The main goal is to look forward into the future and to offer young people orientation. That's the awareness of what is politically desirable and where can we find political role models. In a letter to his brother Justus, Theodor Olshausen wrote on April the 18th, 1864 from St. Louis. Another reason to return to Germany could have been the situation in Schleswig-Holstein. In mid-December, I received an invitation to come back to Schleswig-Holstein by half a dozen of old Democrats, because they lacked any form of leadership. For me, however, it appeared obvious right from the beginning that things would turn out just as they had in 1848, because people again clung to the Duke of Augustenburg and the other German princes. And that, given the fact of the German blind trust, nothing could be done about it. If one doesn't want to act radically, one should leave it all together. These lines summarize the general political situation of the day. At the same time, they prove that liberty and democracy could be achieved elsewhere in the United States. In order to be able to illustrate the special role of the revolutionaries of 1848, I find it important to note another fact at this stage. It is their being rooted in what is called Vormärz, the pre-March, which means the period between the end of the Napoleonic Wars and March 1848. In her speech, President Kietzer mentioned the Jünglingsbund, which even today is something few are aware of in Germany. The Jünglingsbund was a secret organization of about 120 young fraternity brothers, Democrats and revolutionaries of German university in the early 19th century, whose traditions are still being kept in some of the same academic clubs today. The political aim of the original organization were the abolition of the feudalist governments in the German microstates, as well as their amalgamation in order to form a unified German state. In 1823, the Unionbund was grasped on and dissolved by the Prussian police before it had been able to carry out any actions. Its members were imprisoned and sentenced to long incarcerations, especially in Prussia. These revolutionaries of the early 19th century and today's academic associations who keep their traditions at German universities from the decisive link with which the realization of Yogi Reppmann's stele project has been possible. So why the stele is there and makes people ponder can be explained easily. Yogi Reppmann had the idea, he found sponsors and supporters, an architect made the final design, a stonemason produced it, and a construction company did the installation. More interesting is the question of how this idea was turned into reality and how Yogi Reppmann managed to get the attention of the students of Kiel in order to motivate them to participate in the event of the memorial's inauguration, especially because of the fact that this took place on noon of a Friday, when most students have normally disappeared for the weekend. Yogi Reppmann succeeded in keeping the students longer at the university on that specific Friday, and not only historians, but also students of economics, law, geology, and medical studies attended the ceremony. As for me, I could add a small part to the realization of this project, and today I can speak to you as an eyewitness. It was in the summer of 2009. I read politics at the Christian Albrecht University, and I was helping the Prime Minister of our local government, Peter Harry Carstensen. And in the local government's headquarters, I met Frank Trende, who was writing the Prime Minister's speeches. He was been in government service since the 1980s and is currently managing the bureau of our State Minister for Agriculture and Environment. He has a passion for local history, and meanwhile, one could have the impression that half of the books about our beautiful Schleswig-Holstein had been written by him. During a work session at the breakfast table, we started talking about private matters, and I told him about my interest in 1848ers from Schleswig-Holstein. First and foremost, my interest in the 1848ers stemmed from the fact that the majority of them used to belong to my own student fraternity, Teutonia Kiel. This fraternity is one of the above-mentioned clubs that was founded by young Republicans, among them Justus Olshausen, in the first half of the 19th century, the Formats. In the case of my fraternity, Justus Olshausen and people around him walked to the big political fest on the Wartburg castle, and, inspired by the big celebration of 300 years Lutheran Reformation and 4 years Battle of the Peoples near Leipzig, founded this fraternity. This was in 1817. Theodor Olshausen, his younger brother, became a member too. At the time of 2009, I was a passive member of this fraternity, after having been an active member from 2002 to 2004. Meanwhile, I'm one of the old boys. The ancestral research within my fraternity automatically led me to the 1848ers, most of whom knew each other from their time at Kiel University in the 1910s and 1810s and 1820s. One could say that the provisional government of Schleswig-Holstein in 1848 was something like an alumni network of the Christian Albrecht University. All protagonists have attended Kiel University and had met through their fraternities, who had been home to nearly all students in Kiel. Today, the fraternities have to compete with other leisure time entertainments, and they exist as a sort of niche in society at the university. Frank Trende was the person who gave me the very useful piece of advice to go and see his friend Yogi Reppmann in Flensburg, near the Danish border. The contact was established easily, and just a short time later, Yogi gave a talk about the Olshausen brothers, their lives from the Wartburg Fest through their fraternity years into the revolution of 1848 and finally into the liberty of America. All this took place at my fraternity house, Kiel-Moltke-Straße, where we met. First, Yogi Reppmann came to see us out of, as he said, zoological interest. That means he had some doubts as to know as how conservative a bunch we all might be. That is to say, our fraternity, founded in 1817, in which even today young men are submitted to drinking and fighting, duels versus other fraternities with sharp swords. It's true. He then quickly realized that we are rather a liberal and friendly circle of mates who avoid national sentiments and who like to celebrate traditional togetherness among young and old academics of Kiel University. My fraternity has kept this tradition since 1817 with certain breaks because of external reasons. The hardest cut in our history was a time between 1933 and 1945, when our fraternity was seen as an elite male organization which didn't fit in the Nazis' view of so-called Volksgemeinschaft, that was their idea of a Commonwealth of Germans. For this reason, we had to keep up our tradition in strict secrecy. Freedom, therefore, is a value which is treasured most in our fraternity, right from the start when our young brothers joined. Our claim has always been to make young university students of all denominations familiar with political and historical development and phenomena. And our fraternity brothers have carried out with considerable success. Consequently, it was no problem whatsoever to recruit all of them, whose number are about 5 to 6 active members per semester, for the support of Yogi Reppmann's steel project. What followed were long evenings in which Yogi Reppmann and the young students made a joint effort to get things going and to master all logistical challenges. Then there were countless lunch breaks at the university cafeteria, which were spent handing out flyers to attract attention for the planned ceremony and to motivate fellow students to attend it. The success was quite remarkable. An audience of more than 100 thronged in a lecture theater, originally designed for about 80 people. The media were present too. The Kieler Nachrichten, that's the biggest local newspaper, published a long article about the inauguration, and a student-run online broadcasting station, as well as a local TV, produced it and broadcast video reports. It might be worth nothing that the Kieler Nachrichten are direct descendants of the Kieler Korrespondenzblatt, the newspaper once edited by Theodor Olshausen. So, what is this steel's message for today university students? For several years, the Olshausenstele has been a familiar sight on the campus of Kiel Christian Albert University. It stands on every student's way to the first matriculation and to every renewal of it. The stele invites every passerby to stop and consider the question, what is the link between the Kiel University students of today and the brothers Justus and Theodor Olshausen? The steel's concept has been successfully copied twice in Kiel. One stele was erected in honor of Wilhelm Hartwig Wieser, the president of the Provisional Schleswig-Holstein government, in 1848. The other one was erected in honor of the banker, politician and scientist Wilhelm Ahlmann, who was the secretary of the Provisional Schleswig-Holstein government in 1848. Another idea is slowly bearing fruit. That is to say, the idea of commemorating the event of the year 1848 nationwide. The uprising in Berlin, the provisional government in Kiel, the first parliamentarian Congress of St. Paul's Church in Frankfurt, these were the very first attempts to establish in Germany a truly parliamentary democracy. Wolfgang Börnsen, a a member of the German parliament, who, like Yogi Reppmann, comes from Flensburg, works on a project to establish the 18th of March as a national memorial day of German parliamentary history. Even after his retirement nowadays from the Bundestag, members of all political parties are welcoming this idea. It will be interesting to see what the outcome of this initiative will be. The number of its supporters is constantly rising. The concept of putting side by side the important reminder of our political catastrophes in the 20th centuries and their democratic counter-design of the year 1848 is, in my opinion, a very good one. Let us protect our democracy. In many parts of the world today, it is anything but self-evident. It is of crucial importance to explain to our young people the roots of our democracy and to show which shortcomings there were in this first try, and to point out which of them led to its ultimate failure. In order to make the point, if you fail, try again, try harder. The stele is a wonderful complement to Kiel's university's motto, Pax Optima Rerum, Latin. That means, peace is the most precious of things. The Christian Albrecht University in Kiel was founded in 1665 as a university for the whole country, still under the impressions of the catastrophe of the 30 Years' War, which has laid to waste complete territories and annihilated their populations in all parts of Germany. The university's motto is a reflection of this yearning. Peace is the most precious of things. The yearnings for freedom of the 1848ers who immigrated are based on this, because one can't separate peace and freedom. The stele of the Olshausen brothers is to remind us of the 1848ers' fight for freedom, a struggle that they couldn't win at home, but were finally able to overcome in the USA. It is furthermore to remind us of the willpower of single personalities which can precede great success. Yet it is, finally, to remind us not to put freedom at risk light-heartedly. Getting it back or achieving it is always a fierce struggle. An American proverb says, freedom isn't free. And this is entirely correct, because freedom has to be defended every day anew. Memorials can help support the keeping of peace and freedom. The stele of the Olshausen brothers is such a support because it makes young people think about these values. At the end of my paper, let me quote the Austrian songwriter and cabaret singer Fritz Grünbaum, who was born in 1880. He said, "For me the German word Denkmal, that's memorial, is a lifelong imperative that consists of two words, Denk, think, and Mal, at least once." Fritz Grünbaum died in 1948, murdered in Dachau concentration camp, in the center of Germany, but far away from peace and far away from freedom. Denk mal. Think, at least this once. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very informative paper on how we deal with the memorial of 1848 in Kiel. I'd just like to add one point. The next stele will be put up on the 24th of March next year, and it will commemorate the joint provisional government at the old place where it was proclaimed in 1848. So that is the next project. And if we look back for the 4 years since 2009, this is something Yogi has initiated, continues, and goes on, goes on, goes on. So he's in a way rediscovered the 1848ers, not only here, but also in Schleswig-Holstein. We now have the opportunity to ask Joachim questions about the culture of memory of the 48ers in Germany. So feel free to ask. Maya.
It's a different kind of question. Is there an advisor to your fraternity by the name of von Rohr?
Von Rohr? Von Rohr?
Von Rohr.
Von Rohr? No,
Consul in the Los Angeles, and he was advisor of fraternities.
Maybe I've heard about him. I don't know if I've heard about him, but he's not in my fraternity.
Okay, I'm going to get back in touch with him because he asked me to get in touch with him.
Oh,
We should stick to the
Yeah,
1848.
but curious to hear about this fraternity.
just give him my number.
I never heard about it before.
Okay.
I just have a quick comment, actually, and I want to say how much I appreciate hearing what you're saying and what Yogi, the work that Yogi Reppmann is doing, because I remember as a Lehrbeauftragter when I was a doctorate in Germany and I was teaching for the first time in Frankfurt, and I was trying, I thought, I was teaching American studies, and I'm thinking, well, of course, I know their own history, so I used the 48 movement when I was talking about federalism and the discussion about what the Constitution was. No idea. I mean, absolutely no idea. People who are familiar with Frankfurt, of course, it's a pretty well-to-do city. Over about 2/3 of the students had studied abroad for more than 3 months. You would think that they would know. They had no idea. And that was Pauskirche in the middle of town. And I said that, really the 48ers, I think, represent something they can, with this whole discussion about Vergangenheitsbewältigung, it's a perfect segue into sort of a honest conversation about what German identity should be, could be. I just really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Yes, please.
Just to follow up on what was said here, has there ever been a thought of putting a marker up at St. Paul's in Frankfurt to mark what important things were going on there in 1848? Or is there one?
Actually, I can speak to that unless somebody else wants to. It's actually inside the church. Outside the church is virtually nothing other than, well, Kennedy spoke here. But other than that,
there's a little,
but it's hardly noticeable.
Ausstellung exhibit.
Yeah, inside it's wonderful. And if you ever have a chance to see inside, it's wonderful. But as far as the outside and getting the attention that I think the shield does.
If you don't know that this is the St. Paul's Church, you would actually pass this without seeing any hint that this is the birthplace of German democracy. It's a bit of a shame. It's often in television because important German prizes like the Books Prize and other prizes are often handed over in the St. Paul's Church with a very big attention from the media. But from the outside, if you don't know, there are no real signs. They do not really, in a way, advertise this as the birthplace of democracy. That's a bit, I think, if it wasn't key, we would have made it different. Put up steels and more signs and be proud of it.
Yeah, maybe it's the right way to do it a step higher, to get a national remembrance day of parliamentarian democracy, and then going back to the church in Frankfurt together.
We've got now the 3rd of October is our national day. Is there any chance, or do you think it's possible that it might actually turn to sometime on the 18th of March? Or
in a different way, I think it's possible to get a remembrance day without getting free at school. Yes.
Any further questions about the culture of memory?
The President Lemke from Bodenstaff, he said that we want to
speak up. No.
That we want to choose as the president at that day. Last time, when Gauck was chosen.
Joachim Gauck, our actual president, Germany, Bundespräsident, was elected last year at the 18th of March in 2012. Yogi and I have been there, but only outside, but it was a nice day.
Any more questions to that? Yes, please.
Is there a connection between this Jünglingsbund and the Mazzini movement in Europe, young Europe and young Germany? He promoted this idea of European unification on a democratic basis. The United States.
I've never heard about such a thing.
It's too early. It's too early. Mazzini came. Mazzini came 1830. Make up is young Europe, and after that, young Deutschland came up This was 1870, 1820.
So this is the answer. So connection.
No, that's okay.
Okay, I think we'll go on with Yogi Reppmann, who still has a chance to ask any of those questions. Now I've got the extremely difficult task to introduce Yogi Reppmann. I couldn't find any information about him. So, I have to cut myself very short. He's basically the one who rediscovered the 1848ers, not only in America, but also in Germany. And as we all know, he's passed on his passion, or you may call it obsession, to many other people who are also now infected by the 1848 virus. And shortly said, Yogi used the 1848ers as a bridge between Germany and America. And I think in times when America is in a way looking now to the Pacific, maybe no longer to Europe, the 1848ers are a perfect link to be aware of your roots, where you're coming from. And I think one of Yogi's next projects, the Stoltenberg Institute, is going into this direction to strengthen the links between America and Europe. And that is what he's going to talk to us now about the Stoltenberg Institute for German-American 48er Studies. Feel free to tell us more about it, Yogi.
Thank you very much. I will make it short and brief. It was a long conference, many inspiring, great talks, and wonderful visitors from Germany and from all over the United States. I was asked why Stoltenberg. Stoltenberg was the head of state in Norway, lately voted out. Is it a Low German farmer from Scott County, Iowa? Who is it? Well, the answer is a little story, and that must be told in order to understand the deeper meaning why I think the Stoltenberg Institute for German-American Studies only can have that name. To start the short story, Wild West novels by an author, Karl May, inspired me, started me in my strong interest in America in the age of 12 and 13. Then, the early 70s, it was not really on vogue to be in love with America because of the Vietnam War and Watergate. All my buddies at high school thought I'm the ultimate idiot to have an interest in America. So 1976, I finished school. The exception proves the rule. 1976, finishing high school, I had read Jack Kerouac on the road, so I hitchhiked half a year around the United States, had enchanting hospitality, met amazing people who treated me better than my parents. So in 1978, being a young student of history, I had a buddy from Lübeck, and he was interested in Great Britain, in England. And I could convince him, let's go to America. And we had no money, so we went to our governor, because we knew our governor in those days was a PhD historian, and we thought, well, a fatherly figure for Schleswig-Holstein and a historian, he might give us money. We did not meet him in 1978 in his office, but a young staff worker, Thomas Gruber. And there were two other famous later staff workers, Horst Köhler and Hans-Jürgen Ahrens. These were young guys, young civil servants, working for the governor, Gerhard Stoltenberg. And interestingly enough, one of these staff workers became federal president of Germany, Dr. Horst Köhler. This Thomas Gruber became CEO of one of the largest TV and radio stations in Bavaria. And the third one, Hans-Jürgen Ahrens, became CEO of the largest sickness fund. 27 million Germans are, or were, all are now retired, insured by him. So we met these guys who were not that much older than us, but they thought it was a good idea that we should be sent to America. They felt we need a good education. We looked a little bit like hobos, uprooted, so they said the American way of life will fix these young students. So 1978, visiting Kiel, Wisconsin, north of Chicago, in a pub, we had money from the governor, we were drinking our third beer and felt, let's write a letter of thanks from Kiel, Wisconsin to Kiel, Schleswig-Holstein, Germany. So we did, and thanked our governor that he gave us money, and we told him honestly that we drink beer and have a good time in America. Surprisingly, after our return in November '78, there was a letter from that governor, who was already very famous because as a young politician, he was already a Secretary of Research and Scientific Studies under Chancellor Adenauer. So that man, before he became governor, had already a very, very amazing career as a very young politician, and many West Germans felt one of these days this governor ought to be Chancellor of West Germany, and in case he would have been Chancellor of the United Germany. So we had this invitation for coffee and cake by the governor. We arrived, there were two charming, beautiful secretaries. One lady was known together before we had met out of a Europe Union organization. And we were sitting, and he told us his story that he had been visiting Wisconsin 1976, visiting the governor as part of the bicentennial. Well, long and behold, we got a cognac and a second cognac, and then Dr. Stoltenberg had a box of cigars, took a cigar out and started his cigar. My buddy, who has a mom who is an actress, was an actress, said, Mr. Stoltenberg, your cigars are smiling to me as well. Might I have my fingers in your cigar box as well? And he, as a formal German, got up, closed his jacket, got his two lady secretaries, and it said, my ladies, these are my new young friends, these are historians, and it never happened in my whole life that I started smoking a cigar before I offered to my guests the cigar. So even when I'm not in my office, these gentlemen have always free access to the box of cigars. We should not have said that because we became regulars in the office, and to make a long story short, we developed an amazing friendship to the governor, who had the reputation of being very distant because he wanted to be chancellor. And we could do anything and everything. We had access to his bottle of cognac, so Monday mornings in the winter when our student apartment was cold and unpleasant, we went to our new lady friends. He was often in Bonn to work on his next career jump, which happened as a Secretary of Finances. Well, 1978, 3 months visiting the Midwest, Keelan, Wisconsin, Flensburg in Minnesota, a town founded by Polish immigrants, and they took the name of my hometown, nobody knows why. We had written 18 pages, poorly written. This was our thesis after '78, but we got our little shine in order to get your shine. 1982, we felt we should go again to America, and the governor gave again quite a bit of money, and that was the first time of really serious research, writing our MA thesis, then working on the PhD thesis, and the contact to this governor, who was in the meantime in Bonn, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Finances, and then Secretary of Defense, was that the new secretaries always knew there are two wild, strange, hobo-type, uprooted, poorly dressed, hobos, bozos, maybe a little bit alcoholics, whatever, but these are close buddies of your boss, so better treat them well. They always have free access to the booze and to the cigars, and that went on in a nice way. Even in 1999, Stoltenberg paved the way to Henry Kissinger in New York. Why? As a very young student by himself in 1951, this very young politician slash student of history was invited by the American government, 5 weeks in tour in the United States, and the last week those young politicians can express what they would like to do. So as a good student of history, the later Governor Stoltenberg said, I want to visit Harvard University. And Henry Kissinger was in his first semester teaching history at Harvard, and these men became very close buddies. So in 1999, we had a phone call from influential publisher, newspaper publisher, and he said, I produced the last book of Gerhard Stoltenberg, and he mentioned Henry Kissinger. Could you have a video with Kissinger talking about the friendship to Governor Stoltenberg? As a surprise at the book party, we would like to show that, and Kissinger immediately agreed. So in December '99, Gitta and I had to postpone our trip home twice, but it was quite a meeting because at the end of the meeting, we gave Henry Kissinger 100 grams of Lübeck marzipan. And he had tears in his eyes because before he went into exile, emigrated in 1938, his parents had bought once a year this expensive marzipan to his brother Walter and Heinz August Kissinger, Henry Kissinger. So that was a childhood memory, and since then Kissinger said whatever you do with Stoltenberg he would like to support. To make a long story very short, 2006, as you know, I met Scott Christensen through the footnote 707, and for a long time we are all dreaming, how can we use these 48er research, especially this conference, to have a vision, to have a project to get historical markers in America and Germany about 48ers, for example, Karl Schurz in Cologne and in St. Louis or New York. At the same time, maybe the Rotary clubs of both cities or citizens from both cities work together, having such historical monument like we have about the Olshausen in Germany and America, in the cities where people, 48ers, had been born and where they sort of became famous 48ers. So there's a lot of stuff to do, and my former boss Carl Fink said, why do you wait to have a huge donation? Nowadays you can have a digital institute like the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame project is an email address, it's an internet website and an address, and you start working. And we immediately already have started working on the first yearbook. And many of your papers, or all of your papers, would be ideal for this first yearbook. Please support us in our institute activities. I can envision that the institute is not only historical research and historical markers, it can be also a forum for a German-American discourse and kind of meeting place in every respect for all folks of all parts of society. So, to make a long story short, the vision is the Stoltenberg Institute for German-American Studies uses this positive early democratic movement of 1848 and all the things happened by 1848ers from Germany and Europe. For example, the Hungarian 48ers, many of them ended up in Davenport, Scott County as well. What had happened? The Hungarian Revolution was shorter in Schleswig-Holstein from March 24th until very early 1851. There was a revolution going on. The Hungarian 1848ers came to a hotel in Altona, now part of Hamburg, in those days next to Copenhagen, the second biggest city in Copenhagen. They lived there for 6 months, had met the Schleswig-Holstein 48ers, and while a chain migration was already in the making since 1846, 1847 to Davenport and Scott County, eastern Iowa, they went with the Schleswig-Holstein 48ers to Davenport and became friends and close comrades. So there is so much research going, should happen, and with that institute we have a platform, and I would love to invite all of you, especially Klaus Peter Köln, to be on the advisory board. No work and just fun. Thank you very much.
Yogi's pushing out once again doors for new research on 1848. Any questions to him, suggestions, or feel free to ask him. Any questions to one of our last three speakers? If not, or
Peter might have a question. Yes.
yeah, feel free to ask.
What is the connection to this Yogi? How do we connect to it from our to your
Email.
email?
And
Okay,
my website, Moin Moin, will be sort of the platform of the institute. And we have relaunched moin-moin.us, and you find a lot of interesting stuff about 1848 already, and first information about the institute. And here is, I printed a little bit. Scott Christian developed a wonderful floor plan, a genius floor plan for the institute and the German-American Heritage Center in Davenport, at the Centennial Bridge, at the Mississippi. Has this wonderful hotel with a great, really modern exhibition. Next to that hotel, they had received quite a building with a huge auditorium, which is empty, and they offered already, well, you guys could have that second building, which is empty, as your institute building, but we still need a lot of money to get that renovated and endowment for staff and so on. So therefore, Carl Fink said shortly after Gitta and I had arrived in September in Northfield, get started with a digital kind of institute, and the rest will happen by itself. Maybe you are a rich man, Peter, and will donate.
How about that? No, there's another guy.
Okay.
Yogi, sollte man in Grand Island nicht, should one in Grand Island not erect a state for Hedden like you have it in Rendsburg? That's your idea?
A wonderful idea. Edith is from Grand Island, Nebraska, and we heard these wonderful accomplishments of Friedrich Hedde, the younger close friend from Theodor Olshausen. He took over the Kieler Korrespondenzblatt in early April 1848 after Olshausen went to the provisional government. So that would be a wonderful project. Friedrich Hedde, born in Rendsburg, which is famous and important in the Schleswig-Holstein Revolution, and in Grand Island, to have that logo, that kind of historical marker as Yogi, Bodenstaff, Denkmal, think once what had happened, and to have a nice event, a day's event like we had, and everybody's invited, and we have a wild party with Edith in Grand Island.
I have the newspaper behind me.
Yes, and she is running the show. So this is, Iowa is my favorite state, and especially when you tell St. Olaf students or Carleton students in the first class of your seminar that Iowa is your favorite state, the students are under the table and pounding on the floor. You never say that, you even don't think that, but don't you think this looks nice? And when you think that the Schleswig-Holstein colors are like the Iowa colors, I think we have a wonderful reason to have the Stoltenberg Institute in Eastern Iowa.
Any further questions?
Does anybody else know this name von Rohr?
No. We know.
Before I would like to close this session, I would like to say a few words as a participant of this conference, because I think for this last session it should be said, and it must be said. A very, very big thank you to Professor Daniel Walter, to Dr. Yogi Reppmann, to the sponsors of this conference. It's been a great conference, and a very special thanks also to Wartburg College for hosting this conference, for your fantastic hospitality. It's been a great conference, and I think you'll agree with me. So big applause. You and your team, you've done a marvelous job. Thank you very much.
Well, wait till the dessert tonight, because I think
then you'll get an even bigger applause.
It's been a long day. We're going to do some final comments. I'm going to try in about, when we come back in 15 minutes, to see if I can summarize what we've discussed and throw out a couple ideas as well for further thinking. But it's